I am very, very excited about this episode of the Rave Story TV. We have got what I am calling a real deal character. You know I love my real deal characters. Joe Labyrinth's been up here. You all know how much I love Joe. The way Joe tells his stories is proper. When I told Joe I've got this man coming on, Joe said to me, Dan, you can tell people this publicly. Andrew is the real deal. And when I first started going out raving and discovering this scene, this man taught me so much, even though he's much younger than me. Yesterday, I spoke to Andy Swaller. Andy Swaller said to me, Dan, give Andy my love. That man is an absolute ambassador and pioneer of the warehouse acid rave scene. On Saturday night, I played for Jay Pender, World Dance. I said, Jay, I've got Andrew coming on my podcast next week. He went, Dan, that is amazing. Give him my love. And I cannot wait to hear his stories about the rave scene because he is the real deal. Andrew?
Well, thank you, Daniel. What can I say to that introduction?
I thought it made sense, right? Every time I can say this man's the real deal when it comes to warehouse promoting, but those three characters alone.
Three great guys as well.
Absolute governors, mate.
Yeah,
absolute
pioneers.
Legends. And just I speak to Joe all the time. I speak to Andy all the time because I'm on his station. And I played for Jay on Saturday. So I just dropped in with them just to get their response. And I thought that was the best way to intro you.
Well, we all go back a really long time as well for the beginning of this scene. So hopefully some of them stories will, get out here today.
We'll come out. And the thing is, for me, because we're a rave podcast, because of my DJ style and what I represent, of course, all the stories of you smuggling and all the documentaries and all the other, it's out there.
Yeah.
That ain't the bit that interests me about you. It's the sound system, culture, the heritage of your mum and your dad, your rave history before Genesis and all that stuff that you did. So I want to go right in. I want to go into like the heritage of your parents first.
Yeah. So, if we wind it right back, very interesting, I suppose, and it's kind of moulded me to the person, I guess I become and the journey I'd went through, not necessarily, under their direction, but I kind of found my own way. But I guess they instilled a lot of different things in me that kind of made me want to be that person going out there getting stuff from an early age. So winding it back, my mum, she came to this country in 1951 from Jamaica, which would have been a terrifying thing at the age she was so young. It'd be like going to the moon, if you could imagine. She was 21. So, she was really a baby. And when she came over to England, obviously it was told the place was, paved with gold and stuff like that, which everyone was told it was a very hard place to come here and, survive. Like many things, she was married in Jamaica to her first husband, had my eldest sister, and she came over to be with her husband. That relationship was quite abusive. It didn't last. She left and she met my father. My dad, completely, East End boy from out of Oxton. Long history of builders. Bricklaying was a trade that had been passed down through a few generations. And my dad took the trade, but he also started to sell paraffin because back then people were reliant on paraffin heaters, to heat the houses. And he created a paraffin route, him and his brother-in-law, and that took them through the heart of, northeast London, where they sold door-to-door paraffin. And along that way, he, got to meet quite a few people in the West Indian community, became friends with a lot of people, and inevitably was one night invited to a party, which was where he met my mum. And, it was from the beginning, they kind of, fell for each other. And in no space of time, they sort of moved in together. and started to build a life. And how that life was built was interesting. And I think music kind of played a massive part. And I think that's where it kind of, I inadvertently, had it in me from the beginning. At first, in fact, a very good friend of my father, who my dad opened up some of the Paraffins routes, who was a guy called Bill Hill, not to be mistaken with the Billy Hill of the Craigs and of the generation of Jack Spots. He was, a little bit of a villain, but not a villain completely. But he did want to open a nightclub. And at that time, it was incredibly difficult. We're talking about 1956, to have a premises, dance and music license to play black music was virtually going to be impossible, the sort of stuff they'd face. So my dad, stepped forward and agreed to be director of the club. And he got a music and dance license secured. It was at 60 Green Lanes, Haringey. The club was called a Pepper Pot. And they didn't have a drinks license, so alcohol used to be tins of Coca-Cola laced with, whiskey, sold from underneath the decanter. But it was a club. It was somewhere where West Indians could go. They could, get in touch with their culture. They could eat Caribbean dishes. They could listen to the latest music, which was coming over on soft wax. And it was a general spot. My parents were very sociable people as well. In no space of time, very ambitious. My father being a builder, my mother, she suffered being evicted from a property earlier on when she first came to this country. So her ambition was to never be reliant on renting properties from people. So it was all about building and, buying property. And she'd done that successfully. She had two means of, making money. One of them was what they call a pardner system, which is a community bank, which is quite common in the West Indies. It's where people who have got jobs, give a certain amount of money each week from their wages. A person known as the banker, which is my mum was a banker in that case, would hold on to that money, then disperse the pot of money to someone each week. And that money would be substantial, depending on how many people through the amount, what they called a draw, or how much they put into the pot. And that was used for deposits. Lots of West Indies houses, around here is of Brixton, Stoke Newton, where you had big houses where they had big families where you could house people. And, that was her introduction into being able to run a community bank. She was trusted. But also, she wasn't satisfied with that. My dad had to turn the basement of our first house into a boutique. My mum knew some traders who had cloth factories in the local area, most of them Maltese, and they used to get what they call cloth, and the cloth used to come over from the factories, for like Freeman's catalogues and Littlewood's popular catalogues at the time. And off the excess cost, it would be called cabbage. So cabbage would be the additional material, and then what they'd do is they'd do additional run off for those dresses. So what she would do is buy all the run-offs for those dresses, the surplus stock. She would take them from the factory, and she'd actually have the stock, the season stock, before the actual catalogue who purchased them had it. So what she'd do is take those dresses, she'd have them in the basement of the house. Women would come all day Saturday from Ridley Road Market, buying their fresh produce, come downstairs, try on dresses, buy dresses, and she even expanded at the time as well to actually create like an Avon system service. So she got what they call grips, which were the old suitcases, and she would give women suitcases or dresses where they could go, to other people they knew and work on a commission and sell those dresses.
Right.
So she actually grew an incredibly successful business from early age.
Business?
It was just known as Mavis's Pardner and Mavis's Boutique. My mum's name was Marion, but everyone called her Mavis, which would make sense. And, everyone knew Mavis. And that was like, she was a real centre of the community. And my dad being a stable, East Ender, who, he was an incredibly, great, good builder in terms of bricklaying. When people, West Indians, bought houses, they all used to go to him. And he'd be trusted to build extensions.
West Indian
he
culture.
Embraced the West Indian culture completely, even though he wasn't a great lover of West Indian food. My mum was a great West Indian cook. He still used to like his, fish and chips and, his Sunday roast. And my mum used to do all that for him, as well as cooking, our West Indian food and her West Indian food and blending it all together. So we had a wonderful, fusion of mixed cultures in the household. And I think we benefited from both sides. I think it was a time growing up that, you were kind of learning and finding your feet, especially as a mixed race individual, because there weren't that many of us really around, so it was a little bit of navigating the wheel way through. But as I said, I had a really good childhood.
What year was you born?
I was born in 1966.
Right.
So, England World Cup and all that, do you know what I mean? I kind of... when I sort of turned up, as I said, my sister had already been with my second sister. She was born in 63. So I was the sort of baby, the youngest one of the family, and only boy as well. So that was a question of, all eyes were on me. It was what's going to come next. And I was at school. I was kind of a not bad student. Went to a local school, which was a mixture of immigrants and, local, like East End children. And then I moved on to another school, which was a little bit more upmarket. That was called St. Jude's. Didn't take it personally, but St. Jude was the patron saint of lost causes. I think I was learning something early. Right. And then they sent me down to Philip Magnus, which was a local school in King's Cross, which again was quite a notorious school because a lot of people went to that school, who went on to, let's just say, take criminal paths in life. And I left there, school was going to amalgamate, and I was sent up the road to go to school in Edmonton. Well, North Londoner,
So
born bred Arsenal.
School. You went around?
I travelled schools and never really settled at any. And
was you getting kicked out of schools?
Yeah, when I started to play truancy, that was my thing. I got to a stage whereas, especially when I went supposed to go to school in Edmonton, I didn't like it. I didn't fit into it. And that was when my musical journey sort of started. So this is... Would
you say mid-70s?
I suppose we're talking about 76. I was 10 years old. So it was about 78. Right. When I was about 12, it started to get a bit haywire. By the time I was 15, I was completely gone off the spectrum. And I think that was partly to do with my, love for music, because the journey had gone through that phase at Philip Magnus where you liked, specials, and the mod revival was back and you listened to that kind of stuff. But then I started to turn more to reggae. And a cousin of mine who had a sound system used to pass by the house every Wednesday evening, and he had a sound system. So I became fascinated with, the clothes, the fashion, the style, the music. And when I should have been going to school, the 149 bus happened to be en route to two record shops. On the left-hand side going up, there was a shop called Body Music in Seven Sisters. On the other side coming back, there was R&B, Rita and Benny's. And both of those were like two of the best hubs for reggae music, in London. So rather than spending time at school, I found myself spending time in those record shops. But, it further developed when a school friend of mine from primary school, his brother and his brother-in-law set up a sound system, and they lived not far from me. And, they started building their own speaker boxes. The system was called Harmonic Shades, and they were like a junior sound to a bigger sound called Stereophonic. They were one of the biggest systems that played on the circuit at that time. And I spent every day there, basically, learning how to build speaker boxes and giant quad boxes and learning about amplification, about sound system. And then I think their sound system kind of started to fall apart a little bit when I was about 16. All this equipment was going up for sale. So, I'd done what any 16-year-old do, beg, borrow and stole my way to buying it. And that was it, kind of. That was the sound system. And a few people, one of them was Kevin, DJ Hype, as you know, Kevin, and Carl and Elle at Hyman Twins, Shut Up and Dance, they became. Yeah. They lived on the road just one down to us, and they were great at building speakers. They used to be fabulous speakers. So we kind of used to, to get speakers from them onto the set that we had. And then one of my partners in the sound system was Richard. He, started to get heavily involved. He got a job, what was on the strike force, they called it. I think it was G&M Records before they become Wired for Sound. So him and Trevor Nelson had that job. They used to go out every day. And Trevor lived on the next road as well, Princess May Road. And they used to have to go out every day and put posters up in shops, basically advertising all these import 12 inches and American records. And, you know, everyone started to find their own way somewhere in music. I started to delve myself further and further into sound system. And like everything, I went off the rails a little bit, went to prison for a short period of time, but I bounced straight back into music.
Did you go in prison for a while?
I was a thug, used to rob people. Generally, you know, I was just a horrible person, you know, because that was the environment I chose to make myself, you know. But music, of course, I loved, but I couldn't get a grip on it, you know. But then coming out, I did get a grip on it. I started to, you know, fall into the whole scene of the rare groove. And then actually, I missed a bit there because when I went to college prior to that, I had a friend there, Bigger, and they had a sound system which was Mellow Rockers. And I had obviously the amplification, they had the speakers. And what we then done was used to hire out the sets, which were the early soul blues parties. So Dominic Cattle Estate in Leighton, they used to put on soul blueses there, and those were very early. So this was Derek Boland, you know, who was like one of the pioneers of the whole mix scratching scene, and Bobby and Steve from Zoo, who had the decks, who would turn up with the decks. We provide amplification and speakers. Lyndon C, who was one of the pioneers of this scene.
Lyndon needs to get mentioned.
Lyndon, yeah, people, you know, Lyndon's not mentioned enough, you know, and he was one of the pioneers of this whole scene, you know. And yeah, so that was the early stage. This was soul blueses. This was before the scene came into it. Then I became a rare groove DJ because I used to collect.
Give us some people. Of the tunes you used to play.
God, so
like
so the tracks I'd play, like Voices of the East Highland, Wanted Dead or Alive, was a big tune. Gwen McRae, Love I'm Giving. I'm Back for More. I mean, Breakwater, there was a stacks. I was a collector of music, and where we used to play on the old sound system set as well, we played sounds like Apollo. That was Cass Manhattan, he became, and Neil and John. And I used to buy lots of music from Cass and people like that. So, you know, I collected Rare Groove and become a real connoisseur of the music. And that was the route I was taking. And where we can jump to the story now, because obviously this is a story where everyone gets involved, was around about 1987, because 87 now, a scene was starting to emerge, but from different angles. So there was a whole scene going on with Balearic Beats in Ibiza was being born, but also the old sound system circuit, which was now the soul blues, moving more up market. There was a place called Venue in Chelsea, and I remember going there, and I think must have been 86, 87, and here it was 87 here in Bam Bam, Give It To Me, which was probably one of the first house records recorded at that period of time. And this was merging through, but I wasn't paying much attention to it. But then one afternoon, a couple of my friends, who you know is Freddie.
Fresh Plate
Freddie.
We love Fred.
So long before Freddie was working for Keith Tubby's Cutting Studios, Freddie had a regular job as a lift engineer, but he found himself out one night, and they went down to the Trip, which was the result of Nicky Holloway coming back, moving away from the Special Branch, which was his, you know, concept he used to do, which is a rare groove event, usually do at the Zoo, and moving over to this whole new acid house kind of scene at the Trip. At the Astoria. Anyway, one of their friends, basically, he went at a party. I'd done the party, and this was the beginning of S Express being played. And then the following week, I had another guy come to me now, and this was Peanuts. And Peanuts, again, we've got to give Peanuts some credit here, because it wasn't for Peanuts, there would have been, you know, I don't know what would have happened, because he was one of the real people who actually went out there and put himself out to do events.
Yeah, because Joe mentioned Peanuts as well. On Joe's podcast, Joe mentions Peanuts as taking him in to his first thing. I don't want you to go forward too quick to Acid, because we've got to talk about the blues, and you putting on blues part. We can get into you breaking into warehouses and doing illegal warehouse parties without talking about you doing that sound system.
Okay, so that was a big part of the sound system and stuff like that. Yes, we can't jump over that, definitely not. No. So where we used to do parties, because warehouse parties was nothing unusual to us. The whole kind of scene, how that came about, was that we used to have what we called catchment houses, which were houses that we boarded up basically by the local council, huge holes in the floor. You know, you couldn't go near them, the toilets were broken, no kitchens. And what we'd do is we'd find a catchment house basically and put on the blues. But the blues concept was very straightforward, and it usually entailed going to a shop, an off licence. My parents, fortunately, you know, had an off licence as well. And, you know, you used to get sale and return. This was all the drinks, and it was like a full bar, brandy, you know, whiskey, Tennant Super, you know, pungently cherry bees and baby shams. It was a typical Afro-Caribbean, you know, drink set template of what people drink at those kind of events. And that would be obviously one of your streams of income. You'd have a table across the door, that'd be £3 entrance, and you'd go down to the flyer shop. We used to use a little place on Kingston High Road called Clearprint. And you go down there, print like 500 or 600 flyers and give those out during the week and during like Saturday, particularly at the markets, and sort of hope for the best, you know. And we started to grow quite successfully across that border. So you moved into those, and also you squat houses as well were another big ones. So you could spend a bit more time, you know, they weren't so obvious that they were, you know, completely derelict, so like setting those up, putting those into place. And we played sound clashes as well. So you used to, you know, get other sounds that would play, you know, with you side by side. You split the door with them or charge a certain fee to play. And even we had a venue, one of our venues was a guy called Bugler owned it on Dunlace Road. And he'd actually built a shed, a big shed at the back of his garden, completely illegal, where they played dominoes, no fire escape, nothing like that. And we used to rent that 60 quid a night, and we'd literally pack it to the Guilders, you know, with people. And I mean, it was sweat. It was insane, you know.
What was you, 16, 18?
16, yeah, 16.
Right.
You know, so I kind of jumped in it very, very early. Yeah. And when say 16, I'm fully responsible for the event. So you've done everything from controlling the sound a lot.
The areas you were in, did you ever get trouble?
Well, you know what? It was unheard of. It's nothing like it is today. What you got to understand was this, particularly in our culture, it was so different because we never had babysitters growing up, okay? If you parents had to go somewhere, they dropped you off at your uncle's house and you were around all your cousins. Yeah. But not even your cousins, people dropped off their kids were dropped off there of colour anyway. And you'd adopt cousins that weren't even your cousins. So you tended to know so many people. So the conflicts were conflicts, don't get me wrong, but they were few and far between. You know, people weren't really going to come along and want to stab you for no reason. All right, you could have shoe on someone's shoe and it could get sticky, especially if they were crocodile skin shoes, and people could have attitudes. But it was very rare for someone to be shot. It was very rare for someone to be fatally stabbed. Do you know what I mean? So you somehow guided your way through, you know, as I said. Not saying it was easy and it wasn't rough because, you know, people did fight and that was part of growing up, you know, but it wasn't anything like it is today in any way.
How often did you do the blues parties? Weekly?
Roughly once a month, because by the time you had to get everything together and you had to, you know, sort of, you know, if you're going to play with another sound, select what sound you're going to play.
What was your sound called? Sorry.
Mellow Magic.
Mellow
How
Magic.
I missed that one? Yeah, Mellow Magic. And our theme tune was Laurel, Mellow Mellow.
Right.
So that was our signature tune that we would play, you know. And that was a mixture of rare groove and, you know, Philly soul and also reggae.
So the ladies selection.
Ladies selection, yeah. And of course, and of course, Lovers Rock as well. Lovers Rock was a huge thing because at that time, you know, clubs we went to, like the Four Races, that was one of the clubs, Phoebe's, and the history was sort of very deep with both of those clubs. For example, you used to have Phoebe's, which was the first one, Amherst Road, and a guy who used to have a second-hand shop, a friend of my parents, Vin, he'd bought it, funny enough. People thought the Craigs owned it, but the Craigs never actually owned that club. It was called Regency, but there were four brothers that owned it, the Barry brothers. And what happened was they obviously were implicated in one of the famous Craig's murderers. And one of the brothers obviously went to prison with the Craigs for the murder. the club was put under severe pressure from the police. It closed down and it found its way into Vin's hands in the 70s, you know, and then it became one of the first reggae clubs that played Lovers Rock exclusively on one floor. Then you had, you know, Roots Reggae on another floor. And of course, my old friend Newton as well down the road. So the story with that went back even further because Newton used to have a partner called Charlie Collins, and it was actually Charlie and my grandfather had a friend who actually owned it, but he owned the lease to that building. It used to be a car auction years ago.
The
Four Aces, as you know it, yeah. And I think he gave Charlie the front of it, which was the Rambling Rose, originally a little drinking club. And then in no time, it expanded. Newton obviously was there with him. They'd moved the club, I think, had it in Highbury originally, the shebang that they used to do. And Aces opened. But then where Aces became really big was it was a sound system club. Yeah. So the sound systems used to play in the front where Labyrinth sort of started off. It used to have Sir Coxon, who was the resident sound system, Fat Man and Java. And of course, it had its share of controversy because obviously Ranking Dread, the famous Ranking Dread, he used to MC on Sir Coxon's sound system, and he was accosted by the famous Cook Report, Roger Cook, the reporter. I remember once at the doorstep of the club, you know, where they proposed he was head of the Yardies. So the club went through a lot of, you know, problems like that, but it had some great times as well. I remember Newton telling me how the Oasis was open because Lovers Rock started in the Four Aces. Louisa Marks, you know, sang, I think it was 76, Caught You in a Lie, which was the first Lovers Rock record probably ever produced. And what they done was they managed to open up a club which ran through on Rosemary Place, which I know Joe opened, and you ran the club right the way through. Line, yeah. And that was a separate club. That was called the Oasis, and that was purely Lovers Rock, where Sir Lloyd and Sir George played. And then the bigger sound systems, the Roots Rock Reggae sounds, played at the front of the club. So it was a real den, you know, for Caribbean music pushing out. And my connection was there, obviously, not only how that club was got, but a member of my extended family, Junior Lincoln, his sister was very close with my mother, and the whole family was, in fact, and Junior was one of the pioneers really of reggae in this country. He came over from Jamaica, him and his brother. They used to do events with Cox and Dodd, the famous producer who had a sound, and they had a shop. He had a shop at 88 Strart Green Road in Finsbury Park. And the shop basically was the hub for the sound systems. So everyone would go in there. Dennis Bovell, who had a sound, he played at the Aces. You had Coxon, you had Shaka, all these sound guys, and he would give them music. But also he was distributor for Studio One label in this country. And Studio One was the foundation of most rhythms, where what records had been covered.
Yeah,
so he was legendary, you know. And so that connection, obviously, with music was very tight. And as he developed, he set up a label called Ashanti, and he looked after Dennis Brown. He had a lot of Dennis Brown's publishing and other artists. And he was very heavily entwined with the industry. And then, you know, he'd set about Count Suckle, which was one of the first sound systems at the Marquee Club. But him and his brother then opened a venue on Carnaby Street, which was amazing, called the Roaring Twenties. And it was the first real late night club. It was in the West End, where Carnaby Street had nothing on it. And used to get people like John Lennon going down there overnight because they wanted to stay and go out. And, you know, all these wonderful characters would go down there. So he became at the centre hub of this wonderful generation of reggae moving through. So, of course, that was where I started to, you know, learn and understand the mechanics of it.
You
study, yeah.
Soak it all up and
everything, you know. I look at everything. It's my mind. It's like, how do I get there? It's like, where am I? Where do I want to go and how do I get there? So if I see, you know, if I've got a sound system and I see a different sound system, I think, how do I get there? And it was what I'd done from going from a reggae sound system to produce a reggae sunsplash,
Yeah.
because you want to go from somewhere to not just stop there, but do the biggest thing you can do in that world, you know?
Yeah.
And it's always been like that. But you have to learn the journey. It's very important to see those that have gone there before you, how they got there.
Yeah. It fascinates me, your recollection and your knowledge of the, not just reggae music and your own sound system and your own moment in time there, but studying the clubs, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Studying all that, because like most people, if they see your other podcasts and your documentaries, they'll just see you as what you did in later life.
Yeah.
This whole reggae into the rave thing, like, fascinates me. How good was your sound system? Tell me about the sound system.
Well, to be honest, Stu, we weren't the greatest sound in the world. We thought we were, like every sound does, but what we were great collectors of music,
right,
and knowing how to play it. So, you know, since sounds had different weights, you know, it's obviously the quality of the sounds. So we didn't have the greatest system in the world. We had a decent system, but it wasn't comparing to my friend Dennis Rose Saxon or any of the other sounds who were serious systems. But musically, we were spot on. We could select good music and we could appease crowds. As I said, and that was the journey we were on. But to say that we, you know, could compete to the sounds that were about at that time. And there were a set of reggae sounds which were like, you know, Unity, Jemmy Magic, you know, these were the sounds that we would have tried to fit into, but we couldn't compete with those. Right. And you had the other sounds as well, because what followed on was the rare groove sounds. And there was like Rap Attack, there was Beat Freak, there was TNT where Ron DJ.
Ron, yeah.
Again, you've got to give credit to these sounds, because these sounds and Mastermind actually were helping break through those beats that came into that whole house generation of music, you know. And these people don't pay any, you know, attention to it.
I've got something for you. Up in Manchester, there is videos of the Manchester reggae scene and the blues scene where reggae DJs and selectors are playing house within their rare groove and their reggae. There's a set which I always celebrate of Ron and Mike West, Rebel MC, Donati from an all dayer that they did, where they're mixing up house with reggae. Yeah. When did you ever see, or when did you first start hearing reggae in, say, your blues parties or your rare groove warehouse parties? Did you start having house music fed through your sets or your DJs?
At that time, when we sort of brought it into Mellow Magic, it was still relatively early. It was still 85.
Yeah.
It still came a year before the house kind of breakthrough was. So rare groove was still the dominant factor. Yeah. Where the breakthrough was coming, and I was this as a breakthrough, were people like Norman J. with Shake and Finger Pop and other sets, and as you said, and DJs who were breaking through. And more so, though, it was more on pirate radio that house was actually getting its way. And a person that's got to be accredited is Steve Jackson, you know, because these were guys who actually got it really early. Froggy, even Froggy, you know, Froggy was the first person to have a pair of SL 1200s, you know, in this country.
Legendary.
He was a legend, God rest his soul, you know, but he had a set. Do you know what I mean? And he was one of those guys people aspired to have a set like Froggy's system. Do you know what I mean? And, you know, the breakthrough of music, because this stuff that went through house, it was made for the technical advancements, not just for the rolling drum machine, but for the SL 1200s. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? That was the kit that made it all happen, you know? Yeah. And DJs became great, like Paul Anderson, you know, who mastered the art of mixing. You know, Cole, you know, Paul was there with 3 decks for a bloody long time, you know, as I said, and it could have been different for Cole Cox, because Cole with me every week, we used to literally rent out our sets to promoters, and Cole would do the warm-up set. He wouldn't play like, you know, the major set, but of course, you know, he stood the test of time and he found his, you know, he's breaking techno, and that was it. You know, the sort of the sky was the limit from that point on for Cohen. Just deserves, because he's done the full apprenticeship. You know what I mean? Yeah. What a lot of guys didn't do, they just fell into it, and now guys are walking around with these memory sticks and sticking them into, do you know what I mean, into a computer laptop.
Around blues and wear out.
I'd done hard.
Acid parties.
They put in the work. They put in the work, you know.
And doing the warm-ups.
It was seriously hard work doing this and investing in this, you know. But getting back to the question of, you know, seeing the transition of the music, yeah, it was gradual. You know, you had the Soul to Soul, you had the warehouse parties, Judge Jules. You started to see warehouse parties coming in, Rosemary Place, places like that, and musics were being broke up, more so hip hop. So hip hop was more or less breaking in, the break beats, and these were the beats that were coming through. And when sort of house dropped, as I said, it was coming through radio, pirate radio stations more so than anything else. And then the early raves, as I said, were things like the venue at Chelsea Football Ground. And then you did have the whole jump start of, you know, the Ibiza lot coming back and Danny Rampling, you know, putting together the shoom, and you had that whole Balearic beat coming across to it, which the two didn't mix, first of all, completely. So that whole scene, exception Nicky Holloway with a Special Branch, right? But the scene generally didn't cross. But what did happen, it was like one magic moment, and I'll tell you what the magic moment was. It was called Ecstasy Pill. Right, and there's no question on getting out of it. Right, once that came into the mix, you know, everything, all bets were off the table. Everyone mixed.
When did you have your first one?
Well, I'd actually done incredibly well because I resisted the temptation of taking ecstasy, you know, for a reasonable amount of time.
Which was mad when you was there.
It was mad because I understand the culture I was coming from, we smoked weed. Because there's a black culture to smoke weed. You wouldn't even stick cocaine up your nose. It looked at as filth, right? To take a tablet, it was like almost unheard of. Yeah. So you got to understand the mentality. That's where we came from. And it wasn't until, you know, being involved in the parties and the parties, so we'll get towards the parties. Yeah. The party journey was, and that's why some of these people have to be given credit for what they've done. I came in, Peanuts, done the first event for him. Mervyn, he played, the guy from...
When was that event for?
That must have been... I was trying to think about it the other day. I reckon that was around about... Must have been...
Early 88.
Yeah, about June, because the trip had just not long opened. Yeah. And I think the trip opened in June, 88.
Right, so before we get on to you providing sound system for Peanuts at your first... He's the first acid party you put your sound in. What was the first, like, housey... acid party that you went to? Because you mentioned
that was it. But no, that was it. That was it. I jumped straight in a deep end. Didn't do any of that stuff. I would not proclaim to do any of that stuff. The first time I entered into it, I was told to, can I do this event? I turned up at this event, put the sound system in there, and I brought a strobe light as well for it. And when I tell you, it was like they dropped a spaceship coming, lifting you up and dropping you out in a different planet. It was like, what the fuck? There was acid playing, everyone had their shirts off, they were going mad. And I thought, what the fuck? When I left there, my mum was like, what on earth was that? It just went off. Do you know what I mean? It was like this mad thing.
That was over East London,
It was Oxford House, which was on Bethnal Green Road next to the Camden's Head. And of course, the Camden's Head used to have an acidy kind of night. That turned out the place got packed.
What was the bloke's name on that place? Camden's Head. God, mate, you used to come in Paul for music when I worked in there.
I do know him. I can't remember though.
Mate, how can I?
Yeah, I do know him. I can't remember. Andy would definitely know. Yeah,
1,000,000%.
So yeah. That was the first jump off, you know, that was the first party. And then they were just in quick succession after that. So the next one, the following week, guys came back, Dino, Ray Watts, you know, a bunch of them. And it was like, we're having another party. Can you do the sound? But we need more light. And I was like, not a problem. So I went to the Young's Disco Hire and went down there. You looked for some different kinds of lights and stuff to add to the set. And they said, you know, the party's on Curtin Road, which is pretty much in the, you know, Old Street City.
Yeah. It's a completely different place.
Completely different place. Completely different. So he turned it as old woodworking factory, must have made furniture. It was covered in sawdust. Set the system up, and Tony Wilson played, Lyndon C played, and a bloody place. It literally just it became mobbed within a space of a couple of hours. Literally mobbed. It was so crazy because they couldn't let any more people in, so they tried to get a ladder from the street and climb up to the second floor and climbing through the windows. I never get guy pushing a ladder down with people on it. It was like something you couldn't have even invented with the madness of the night. But then I've started now to adapt to it more and think to myself, you know, this is really...
It's got to be mad, isn't it?
Seeing this exploding,
Yeah, going from your Lover's Rock, your air groove, then all of a sudden you're getting asked to throw your sound system into...
Completely insane, completely different altogether. Then the next party after that, the following week, one of my friends, Eddie Reard and his brother Bones, they put on a party at Back Church Lane. Cole Cox doesn't sound that one. I didn't sound that one. But the following week, I'd done Cleveland Way we done. So Paul Webb, he put on Cleveland Way. I'd done the sound for that. Eddie done a party at Back Church Lane. I think the following week, or around about a few weeks after that, Peanuts done another one with Paul Roper. That was on Kingsland Road. And then round about this time, Joe was going to have a peek in. I remember his first party, Joe came to me.
In October, Joe.
Well,
October 88.
you know what?
You know what? Tell me this.
Do you know what?
He might have gone.
Joe, I think, had a failed attempt before that. And I want to push his memory on that because there was a little place. It wasn't Mill Place because Webby found that. There was a place, I think it was over Wapping or it was over Mile End. And it was under a railway arch.
Right.
And we literally, I mean, it was hazardous as hell. There was holes in the floor, the whole lot. And I got all this extension cable, ran it from a caretaker's cabin. And if I'm right, Joe was doing it with a guy called John the Butcher, not a sinister butcher as in the gangs of New York, but like an actual physical butcher who they called John the Butcher. And the party didn't happen. I think that was Joe's first outing. This was long before Labyrinth.
He'll see this.
He'll remember that. Yeah, it was. Yeah, he'll remember that. He'll remember that. You know.
Yeah, I want to touch on DJ Tony Wilson.
Tony, wow. So I don't know. Tony, I think
we got to say he's not to be confused with Tony Wilson, who owned the Hacienda records. So I've mentioned many times on radio shows and that Tony Wilson around East London, around this area of Wood Green, Tottenham, he was like everyone followed Tony Wilson, but he doesn't get mentioned in the history of Lyric Beats and Alternate, which he did. Explain the furore around
Tony. So Tony basically was the scene, and I'll tell you what pushed him as well. He was the local lad who you could touch base with because he was there at Stepney. You knew where to find him. And the culprit to that was Andy Swaller. Andy, every week, Andy wanted to put a party on. Yeah. Him and Bones, they'd come to me, 3 times in a week sometimes, and they'd turn up at my mum's shop where I kept all the set, and it'd be like, right, we're on Carpenter's Road. We were on, where were they? Carpenter's Road, Marshgate Lane. They were literally, any door that could be kicked off, they wanted a party in there, you know? And we did have this whole, like, week in, week out, middle of the week, after any club, you know? And Tony was the only person you could drag at the last minute. So I'd come with a sound, Tony would be there with records, and it was a warehouse party it was on. And I'll never forget, one day, this was quite a classic, I broke into the old Popular bus garage. And huge place.
Andy Swaller broke into it.
Huge. I think Bones broke into it, and Andy was in the party with him. And they went into the bus garage, basically. You've got it as a giant place. We boxed off a smaller room. Anyway, being a bus garage now, it wasn't just an empty warehouse. This was like a proper government building.
Right.
Anyway, the police turned up as they usually did. And obviously Andy took off. But then me and Tony were left there because Tony's playing the records and I've got the sound system plugged in. Anyway, they grabbed Tony and it wasn't him a lot. I say, grab Tony by his head. It was ginger hair, like long as about it, and grabbing him like that. The police lifted him out of there. They shanghaied me out of there. And it was actually after all of the parties I'd done, all the stuff I'd done, you know, I came out with one conviction out of the whole acid house thing. It wasn't for drugs. It wasn't for breaking and entering. It was for dishonesty, stealing electricity. Because you plugged in the set into a warehouse or into a venue, and it's the only thing you could get charged with.
Honesty for...
Dishonestly stealing electricity. That was the charge. It was the only charge you could have because they couldn't tell who broke in there. Do you know what I mean? They couldn't, you know, so you couldn't be enough for breaking and entering.
And was that because so that's all before Genesis,
All before Genesis.
and it's before the Acid Squad come along.
The Acid people get really confused with Acid Squad.
That come later.
Anyone that tells you about the Acid Squad and Ken Tappet and all this, it's nonsense.
Yeah.
Ken Tappet and the actual squad, which was the pay party unit,
Yeah.
not to be confused with the earlier squads that they used for Acid. It came in September 1989.
Yeah.
Genesis had stopped doing parties by then, or I'd stopped doing parties by then, certainly. The last one we done was at Mopham, which Jarvis had.
Because there's a lot of things that get confused in the.
There was a squad. There was a squad that went to rave at the Cave, and they turned up there, and that was the first, time people have been seriously nicked for a warehouse party.
LSD spray.
LSD and Ed and Chalky, and again, you got to give credit to them as well, because they didn't last long. They were there like a month before we started. Because I started Genesis on the 10th of December 1988. That was the first Genesis warehouse party, and that was, that journey is, I'd been involved in virtually everything before that, and there were some huge ones. Because I was at the centre point of it all, and some great people. There's a girl called Tamara Adair. She's never mentioned,
Yeah, she kind of connected all the East Londoners
everyone
with like the more central
to the West End. She was around Fat Tony, Boy George. That was her central group of people. Philip Salon, and these Mark Moore. These were West End people, And because her dad used to run the Sunday market up at Hackney, she was very much in the heart with all us lot. Do you know what I mean? So, and we loved her. Do you know what I mean? Because she was this crazy, eccentric, like, well-spoken kind of girl, but she was like, she used to roll up her sleeves and really did muck in. Do you know what I mean? But, she put us all together. She introduced everyone to everyone, basically. And that was a big part of bringing the scene together. Patrick was another guy. He was at the centre point. I mean, Patrick, I remember he'd introduced me to Jeremy Taylor and Tintin on their first rodeo, and that was a great one. They had an office down in Kensington, and he brought me down there to do some additional lighting for the first party. They were going to do the mystery tour, and I met Tony Colson-Slater down there for the first time. Tony, he'd just done a party with Roger Goodman. That was his first sunrise, and these were the West End lot we described them as coming into the scene, and that was a mad one at the Queensway warehouse. It was a carpet warehouse, and I got nicked that night, seriously nicked that night, because we got in there. The encore were doing the sound. I'd done some dish, had a laser man turn up, but then when I came to the outside, he'd invited along World in Action. They were doing some sort of program about it, and basically it was a really bad idea. The police all turned up. I went outside with a group of people. They weren't there into the warehouse. I thought it was a good idea to say, come on, let's steam the warehouse. Of course, everyone was like, yeah. I went in the direction of the police. Everyone in the opposite direction. I grabbed by the police. They beat me up. They threw me in a cell and got turfed out the next morning. And Jeremy Taylor spun off in his burgundy BMW at the time, thinking, what have I got myself into? And then that was a mad bomb of energy, because the following week we found him another place.
What date was that? Can you remember the date of that?
That would have been, big parties, I always landmark big parties. So the big party is a landmark is London Scat. That was in August. And that was a huge party of 88.
Because you know what? Like, before we get on to Genesis, and like, we're both geeks, aren't we? We're both, like, you've got landmark.
We're historians of the scene,
right?
Historians of the scene.
So, like, obviously Genesis comes along in December, which we're going to get onto. We're going to get onto. But if you look at the turn from January 88 to December 89, 2 years now goes by so quickly, but then so much happened.
Happened.
Without so much happening there, we wouldn't have the global dance phenomenon we have. But what I want to know is, so you're doing all these East London parties. You name check tomorrow who brought the West End to what you was doing, and the West London scene. Before Genesis comes along, what were big events that kind of like you looked upon? Because Joe Labyrinth said to me, Dan, Apocalypse Now was the big one, then Genesis come and it blew them out of the water. tell me the trajectory, because it's only a short space of time.
It was very
from
short.
you doing an
It was
acid
very
party like early to mid 88, then all of a sudden
Yeah.
December comes along. Tell me the big parties and the things that you looked at, and then when Genesis come along, and then you went.
Well, I'll tell you the journey, and I'll tell you the people as well. So how that journey went, it was that summer that it all kicked off. I would say what kicked it off, which was the biggest party there was London Scat. And it was Mark and Syrie, God rest his soul. They were fashion designers, basically. I mean, eccentric fashion designers. If you ever saw those carpets, jackets, they used to make these jackets out of carpet. And they were really, really fashionable. And they used to make, you know, various things that were featured in Vogue. And the guy was completely, really, I'm not saying insane, he was a insane genius. But he come along, he went to the warehouse. But again, Tamara introduced me to Martin Syrie. They had a warehouse. They lived in Waterloo. They lived in a warehouse, and they were going to put the party on in the warehouse. I mean, they even got sponsorship from Smirnoff Vodka. This is how plugged in they were. And the day of the warehouse party, we got there. And, of course, the police was sitting outside. There was never going to be a party happening. But the night before, Bones and Paul Webb had done a party at Bermondsey Street. It wasn't a very big party, but they'd used the warehouse. It was a great warehouse, though. And I said, hold on, I might have a space. So I'd called Paul and said, look, Bermondsey Street, we want to use it because these guys have got a massive party about to happen. And Eddie, Dash Bones' brother, Bones, they all wrapped down there and literally went en route through the over Tower Bridge off to Bermondsey Street. And Bermondsey Street was the night it happened because it was West London meet East London meet South London meet North London, and everybody who was anybody part of that thing. It was called a London Scat, and that was the first big party in August. That was the first time Fabio really got his first real outing. He played with Colin Dale, and who headed the bill? Tony Wilson. Do you know what I mean? Tony was on every headline.
Colin
right?
Dale always gets my love. He DJ'd at my last party.
Amazing. Again, one of the pioneers of the scene, you know. So Scat came along, and then in quick concession, there was so another mad one, because I'd done all these parties in East London.
Put all the sound in.
But then I started finding all the warehouses.
Yeah.
So
you were finding them the warehouses.
Well, I had them, didn't I? Because I was doing the smaller parties for the guys who weren't getting crowds, but they had amazing warehouses. All the big promoters who didn't have warehouses wanted warehouses. Yeah. So my deal was, you buy the drinks from my mum's shop. Entered, I'll fund you the warehouse, and I supply the sand. Yeah. So there was always two bites of the cherry that I had, you know. Yeah. And obviously, you ever read the warehouse, you get a massive payday as well. So Roger Goodman, he turned up with Addy. Addy, I don't know if you know Addy. Addy was very popular on the scene. He had a part in Snatch, the film, the Guy Ritchie film. He played Tyrone, the getaway driver. Okay. So Addy was a big part of this scene. I went to school with Addy's brother Cass. We were in the same year at Philip Magnus, you know, and Addy was younger, but he found himself integrated into this scene like no one could imagine, you know, and the pop stars loved him. You know, every famous person from Rod Stewart, he was around them all, you know, and he kind of brought loads of people into it. Well, one day he came by, I think it was, he brought Roger Goodman actually into the shop. I can't remember if Patrick or someone was also with him, or Tamara, and they were there and wanted a warehouse. And the week before, two guys I knew, Russell and I can't remember, Philip, that was his friend's name, yeah. They put on a party. They had an amazing warehouse on Waterden Road. And basically, it was empty. No one was there. In fact, we had Kendrick. He was playing, and he used to work for Wired for Sand. And the place was so bloody empty. He lit a fire out of wood, right? Because it was freezing in there. And the fire brigade come along. Someone said there was the place where it was on fire. I had this big doodah with the fire brigade. Anyway, we finally got kicked out of there. Their party was a disaster. But then the following week, Roger Goodman came along. He'd just done a party with Sunrise earlier, which is the first Sunrise Apocalypse Now party. And he wanted a space. I said, one's down the road. And they moved in. They'd done that night. I think it was November the 11th. I remember it snowed the next morning coming out of there. But that was a huge party. In fact, who I brought into Genesis, Wayne, that was the first time he went to a warehouse party. I invited him down to see that one, you know.
Right.
And then there was, what else was a big event, I'd say, at the time? So Jeremy and Tintin, they were trying desperately to find their feet because earlier that summer they tried the party, which was no-goer, at the Carpet Warehouse. Then they came across again looking for a warehouse, and it was actually my friend Fitzroy and Lyndon and who was it, Robin Perry, used to do Hypnosis, which was a night called the Dungeons underneath the Greyhound pub on Leabridge Road. So they knew of a warehouse, and it was it's an Iceland now, it used to be a snooker hall. So we went there, anyway, we looking around, brought them in there, we're all systems go, but tripped the bloody alarm. The security guard, he came out, we managed to bribe him, but then the police came as a result of the alarm being tripped and kicked us out. And then in spontaneous movement, I mean, Lyndon tried to get us into a mosque or it was a synagogue. I mean, it was mad.
Rave in a mosque.
We were going to go anywhere. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is what it was like at its height. And that obviously didn't happen. And eventually, Jeremy and Tintin were just exhausted by it. And also, the brand they had, which was a really classy brand, Carbon Production it was called, was just getting trashed. So he decided to talk to Peter Stringfellow and got a Hippodrome. Now, Stringfellow had known him and Eddie Davenport from the Gatecrusher Ball events that he used to do. So he thought, it's going to be a great event, all these public school kids, all this money. What he didn't tell him is going to be like 2,000 eat-up, acid-head kids that don't drink. So they descended on Hippodrome that night. All the lasers, all the crowds, and I think Stringford had the worst bar takings ever in the history of the club. He was fuming with Jeremy, but Jeremy managed to get what was early party. It was called Insomnia originally. Then when they couldn't get a space, they called it In Search of Space. And then after that event, he then transformed into Energy. And in Energy, obviously, the rest is history with the huge Dance 89 party and, you know, all that followed, Linford Studios. So that's where Energy came up from and exploded.
You
Tony,
was in the mix, mate.
I was at every party. I don't think there was a party that happened that I never had a physical involvement in somewhere. I was either getting the warehouse, doing the sand, doing the lights. I was organised. I was in the heart of it.
The sound
it was bizarre, and that gave me the edge. Having the technical knowledge and going from blues parties, it was no difference to warehouse parties because breaking into a warehouse was nothing. We'd done it with Catchment House, we'd done it with Scots. So this was part of I'd seen happen since the 1960s, from as long as I can remember, blues parties and shebeens parties, do you know what I mean? From my parents' generation. So when it came through to me, it was like, not a problem, you know.
Incredibly young as well.
Oh, God. Well, I think I started out really, really young. I think by the time we started with the warehouse parties, I was 21, you know, and that is very, very young considering what we were doing and what was going on in Britain at that time, because we were at epicenter, not just of a media storm, because the press came down incredibly heavy on it, but a whole change of culture, music, fashion. But, you know, and I don't think anyone understood, you know, if we'd played that very cleverly and carefully, you know, we would have been in another Ministry of Sound.
Imagine if your 18-year-old son now was breaking into warehouses full of thousands of people on Class A's. And it's hard to imagine this age now, isn't it?
It's your biggest nightmare as a parent.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as a parent, being through all I've been through and all I've done in my past, you know, the best thing I'd do is say, hold on, pause.
Yeah.
Right, this is a business and this is how you're going to structure this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, you know, you'd think about merchandising, all the stuff we didn't even think about.
But that period you're talking about, there was no rules. The rules had only...
We made up as we went along.
Literally, it was happening in the moment, organically, week in, week out. Like, so many of the things, how we see it and view it now, we didn't look at it like that then, whatsoever. The other thing that interests me about that moment in time is had all the sort of... Because it was so early, that them first 6 to 8 months we're talking about of 88, the East London warehouse scene and all that, the gangsters and the football hooligans hadn't started taking over the events yet.
See, as you know, when people talk about these gangster stories and, you know, all this stuff, and this is what I just don't get it. Right.
You explain from your mind.
Look, we were over in East London, right? And we were, you know, a lot of local lads were West Ham, right? Okay. And all our friends, okay. And everyone was enjoying that scene.
Yeah.
Okay. And everyone got along well with everyone, right? Now, the reality of it was, like everything, is a competitive business, you know? So there's going to be falling outs. It's inevitable to happen. But when people started to label things and started to, you know, say, oh, gangsters are taking over, you know, it's like creating monsters that don't even exist.
Yeah.
You know, there's a monster in the cupboard. Ooh. It's not. It's just, you know, you got a few people who are a little bit rough around the edges who are just trying to make their way through it, right? And, you know, I hear stories and I'll just think to myself, what, really? You know? Listen, we were at a stage when we, particularly Genesis, when we got to the stage of doing Genesis, we were becoming very big very quickly because we were fortunate to have a great warehouse we come across, which was Leaside Road. Keith, one of our partners, he came up with it, but it turned out it was a kid I knew, Roachy, God rest his soul. He told Keith about the warehouse. He'd come across it, told Keith jumped on it, and that was his entrance into Genesis. But the warehouse was great because we thought it was legal and we could use it every week. So when you had it, it was licensed to print money. And then the greatest blessing we had was Tony Colson-Hayter. So Tony, I always thought he was a public school boy because how he spoke. And I've got to correct, he wasn't a public school, but his sister, Charlie, has, you know, a few times said, Andy, we didn't go to public school. We went to bloody comprehensive for Milton Keynes, you know. And, but he had that appearance of confidence because his father was he was a lecturer in law. So he had the boldness to understand how to talk eloquently. He was a professional gambler. So he went into casinos in disguises and, you know, and cleaned them out, basically. So Tony was one of the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life.
How old was he at that point?
Same age as us. Same age as us, you know, but he was as bright as a button. And when he turned up at Leaside Road one afternoon, I knew him from before because I knew him from Jeremy and Tintin, you know, and he was like, he's got Sunrise. And at the time, I think they'd just done an Apocalypse Now party. They may have done one other party, but it was small. And he was like, great warehouse, you know, why don't we join together and put on parties? It was a no-brainer because we weren't equipped or ready for it, a warehouse of that size. And Tony's team, his inner circle team, let's see who we had him around him. He had John McHugh. How he hooked onto John McHugh was a living miracle. John McHugh owned Up Front. That's U2's staging company, right? So he's U2's staging manager. U2 were the biggest rock band on the planet at that time, okay, right? He's got John round him. He had Henry, another guy who was involved in film, as a film producer. He had his sister Charlie. But he had this magical little team, and he had a bunch of people that were his helpers who were, you know, willing to do anything. He had Hans, who had a good system which was growing out. So he had a potential thing in place. And what we had street smarts. We knew you're coming down to Hackney to do a warehouse party. This is going to grow. You got to think of what's coming next, you know. And we did join up. The parties started to get ridiculously big, ridiculously quick. The police didn't understand it. And Tony was master of con, okay? And, you know, no one else can take credit for what Tony done. And it was Tony who done it. He used to be able to duplicate leases. So what he would do is he'd go to the estate agents, he'd take a letterhead, basically, and then he'd type up a contract to say, because he understood law, because his dad was a lecturer in law, certain, you know, infringements in law where you could have an event, basically, and the event would be under a disguise of a film shoot. It'd be a music industry party. It'd be something basically that created a loophole in law, and the police were very gullible. But when they see best, you know, ways of middle class, upper class, you know, white guy, very well spoken, in a suit, appearing, telling you about the law with a bit of paper in his hand, they're believing him, right? And when he started to do that week in, week out, which he done incredibly well, the police didn't want to know. They were thinking, listen, there's loads of white kids coming in here. They take whatever they're doing, but there's no trouble. You know, as opposed to the Hackney usual turnout, you know, a blues party, shebeens, someone might get stabbed, you know, there's some drama going on. These were well-behaved kids as far as they're concerned. So they left us alone. They let us grow organically.
Brilliant.
And that's what people don't realise. Genesis just grew and grew and grew. There were some, you know, incidents, but the incidents were just local, basically, you know, thugs from Hackney wanting to break in to get into the party for free. And these were the kind of incidents we had. And then, yeah, there was going to be things where you could see potentially there were people out there where, especially when we were starting to do parties with Andy and we were going into Canning Town and we were going across, you know what I mean? And listen, let's be fair here. Tony was very well spoken. Tony was very delicate, there's to say. And the boys were going to try to, and he was going to get a little bit bodily, right? But that's the extent of it all, right? We did have a security team put in place, right? Wayne's stepfather, Colin, he used to work down at the stairs. Andy used to do the stairs on a Wednesday night. I used to do the stand for him and Tony Wilson, right? And a few of the guys, Colton and so forth, worked on the door. He'd went to Colton, I think, or Dave or one of them, and said, look, you know, can you put a door together? And if they put a door together, they was like dominant the ICF, but they were a good firm. You know, they stood their ground and, you know, they were our security. So when we dropped them there, what it meant was at the end of the day, people local, especially not from the manor, were going to come in and start anything. They felt part of it and they actually, you know, looked forward to Genesis. And if anything, it was pride because they wanted to be part of Genesis.
Yeah.
Do you know, I had no problem with that, right? Because it empowered us even further. But, you know, when you start then suddenly to make accusations that they're, you know, robbing and beating up and kidnapping people, it's all a load of shit. It's bollocks.
Just to make it sound more glamorous.
Just to make up stories. It's all fantasy, you know. The reality of it is, them guys protected us, right? And we gave them a share of the takings. Eventually, it was 25%. So myself, Wayne, Keith, each got a equal share. They got a share, but it wasn't huge because by the time we'd separated with Tony, we still had big numbers, but the big parties we'd done was Genesis Sunrise. That's what you understand because we've had those venues, big venues, and, you know, we filled them to capacity. So that's when it was really happening. When Tony, you know, we split company with Tony, you know, you might as well say that was a separation. And it was when we started our decline because, you know, we did have a really, really bad patch. And the bad patch came, there was information coming out, you know, of the venues before we even got there, you know. So information was being leaked, clearly. And it was raid after raid after raid after raid. And like everything, there's a lot of tension, do you know what I mean? And people are going to get very, you know, short-fused, short-tempered because everyone's at everyone at that time. And, you know, we had a bad run. We had a really bad incident when we tried to do a legal event at Basildon. You know, that didn't go too well.
Before we get onto that, because it's mad hearing you talk, because we're literally talking about December 88, January, February 89, right? Yeah. And in that 3 months, some absolutely magical, historic moments happened that have been and are still being spoken about 36 years later, right? So, and you've just said literally, Tony's gone off, and that's when it started changing for us. How did Genesis, it's 3 of you with Genesis, how did you all meet up and get that first Genesis party going? How did that come, the 3 of you, and the first one out?
So that's good. So basically, I'd obviously had a history of events, you know, from blues parties, you know, putting on my own events. I started putting Rare Groove stuff on at the Country Club and at Chester's and, you know, a little bit more at market, into the journey, obviously, where then I, you know, was invited to that first party to do the Sound of the Light. And I was obviously ingrained in it, you know, and a lot of the parties as well, with Andy, all the other people as well, it got to the stage where I didn't even charge to do the Sound of Light anymore. What we used to do was, if we were breaking into warehouse, we used to say, I'll bring the sound and the light, and we'll split the door. So we partner up on them because literally they were so random, right? And that was that period of time. And then when I started to put bigger organisations into some of these warehouses, I saw the potential that these things can be massive, right? Because we can house them, we can do them. We've just got to think how they can, be scaled. And I met Wayne. Wayne in 1988 October at a friend's house, where everyone used to go basically, and I used to tell them where the parties were, events, blah blah blah. Wayne was round there. I spoke to Wayne. He'd just recently been introduced to the scene, had never been to a warehouse party. I think he might have went to the trip, and then I sort of spoke to another mixed race person, and said, look, this is an amazing scene. Anyway, I used to see him out a few places like the Camden Palace and so forth. Then I invited him to Apocalypse Now when I'd put the warehouse together for the Hackney warehouse for Apocalypse Now. Yeah. And he saw the potential, was like, wow. And I said, yeah, this is something we can do. Do you want to come on board? I'm going to put a party on. And it was like, yeah, of course. Anyway, that was it. So the first party, didn't have a warehouse for that particular one. He knew a guy called Dean who lived around the corner. Guy had a little warehouse he had access to, which was in Aldgate East. So that was a great little venue. Literally had all the sound, I had all the light, had all the infrastructure. It was as simple as that. I went to the local flower shop I'd been going to for years, and it was really mad because they used to have this symbols book, which were basically pencil drawings, most of them, which were old, and you had different ones. So I was looking through there, and there's one particular one which was the head of what's his name? Democros, I think it is. He's a Greek god, and what it was a Greek god of wine, party, and ecstasy. Believe it or not, right? It was like, that's great. That's the head we're going to have, and it was also a little Egyptian kind of figure as well by the same artist. And we picked them two out the book, put it on the thing, had a flyer, printed a few thousand of those. We knew where to go and fly them, and that was going to be, the Spectrum, the Future. Who else was doing parties at that time? I think Lenny D was doing stuff at Unit 4. Who else was there? It was few and far between. There was like maybe a handful of clubs, 6 places, but 6 places were enough, and a story, of course. And that was it. We were fortunate. Say fortunate. Our fortune was Rave at the Caves. Misfortune.
Which
night,
LSD talks about.
They got raided.
Podcast, yeah.
That night they got raided. Police had calculated this raid for months or whatever. They turned up there and literally went in, took the place down, and we were the only thing on that night. So people naturally just in one big cohort went boom and descended on the party, and that was it. So Genesis Chapter 1 was off the ground. Yeah. First party went well. A little bit disorganised, but it happened. And then,
how many people come to your first one?
Well, look, you used to get, I think Rave at the Cave probably did about 500 or 600 people.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's
approximately, yeah. I'd say, give or take, everyone from Rave at the Cave came down that night, and plus what we had. And it was a very small scene. So if you had 600 people, that's probably a lot, right?
Yeah.
But the most important thing is we had a party that we got away with it, right? And, it wasn't until late the fire alarm went off and the police come and, everyone was sort of wobbling and it all kind of, time to disperse. But the party happened. The next thing was a stroke of luck, as I said, because the next thing we didn't have another warehouse to go to. And then it was actually Keith who, went to Wayne and said he's got a warehouse. Then Wayne came and said, look, he's got a friend from school who's got us a warehouse. Can he come as a partner? I wasn't thrilled by bringing in loads of different people, but at the time, you'd done parties with other people. And actually, we had another party booked to do with my really good friend Delsky and Shakesy, And we was like, okay, we just got a warehouse to do the event now. And then we went in there. At this time, Tony turned up at the same time. And we ended up moving into that warehouse that Christmas of 88. And we done, the first one we held was Christmas Eve. I think that was with Delsky and with Shakesy. And the next, not Christmas Day, we done Boxing Day. Again, we had a drum with a sound system. Tony came down and got Joey J, Norman J's brother. Right. Because, Good Times Roadshow, Shaken Figure Pop, preceded that with a sound system, Great Tribulation. And his brother, was a big sound system guy. So he brought the sound system in. I can't remember who had played that night. I think Tony Wilson. Tony played at everything. Do you know what I mean? And Lyndon, Players Kenny, I think, came down and played as well. And we done the Boxing Day. But then after that, it was all systems go, because now it was Tony's turn. So it was like teed up as like, okay, what we're going to do. And then we said, okay, let's go for it. It was New Year's Eve. And of course, what descended on New Year's Eve, no one could have possibly imagined. We'd had 2 successful parties there. People knew where the venue was. So it was now, police had been there. They'd let us get on with the party. It was like, it's a legal warehouse. So then we had a huge party New Year's Eve that night. Nearly got it called off. Tony had to blag the fire inspector that turned up with the police, but got away with it. And the following week, when it should have been nothing happening, we had the biggest party of the year. And that was the 7th of January, 1989. And it was huge. People put numbers on it of like 5, 6, 7,000 people. And, it's hard to say how many people, because I've done festivals for 50,000, and I know 6,000 or 7,000 is a lot of people if you've got a trained eye to look at that, right?
Yeah.
A few hundred people could like 1,000 people they're looking at, but the capacity and the size of the warehouse, we were thousands. We were probably 5,000 people that night, which was huge. That was virtually
every week in January.
When every club was closed, because no one could break bread in January. Do you know what I mean? It was a license to print money we were on. And then when we finally said, this is the magic formula, of all the luck, the police inspector came there during the week, because he literally was there every day doing it up and doing bits of pieces. I mean, Christmas, New Year's Eve, we had Milli Vanilli come down, who were the biggest group, literally, in the world at that time. We had Mark Moore, who was S Express, which is a huge track. Boy George, he came to all of them that night. I'll never forget. Tamara, she came and going, Andrew, they've got George, they've beaten up George. I'm like, what? Anyway, when I've come, I've looked, security's pulling Boy George across the floor. Literally, right? He's been in better states, let's put it like that, yeah? Anyway, they took him and they turfed him out on the pavement. So she's come running out, right? He's like Boy George, international superstar. And we've took him out, we've brushed him back. I thought, fuck. Anyway, right? He was not really comprehend anything. So we've took him, we've put him to sit behind where we had the counter, where we had the money for Tamara and traffic to look after him. And I mean, we just had, that night we had it. I mean, celebrities. We had all the West End. We had a whole lot. We tipped it over to the point this was success written all over it. And then during the week, police inspector came along and said, look, I'm really sorry, but this warehouse who you're renting from, squatting in now. And I'm like, what? The guy that had the warehouse who gave us this receipt, who had all these tyres in there, he basically was a traveller. He'd fucking put his own padlock on it, give us this moody receipt, and happy days. But with all the attention we were getting now, because this was becoming huge, the owner got wind that his warehouse is being crashed to have parties. Anyway, that was the end of that. And that's when Andy really came in, because they were keen to do a party and they got a warehouse. So they found a warehouse. I think the first one was in Borough Canning Town. So we did a Sunrise Genesis Pasha party that night. And then we had another one.
Andy Swaller's parties were Pasha, and that's before
Pasha
we set up.
That's it, yeah.
Centreforce.
Yeah.
Before you get on to that, see like a party that size, and the whole event is like everyone's on E.
Yeah.
Who's supplying the E's in the, or is it just from all kinds of people? Just people.
Yeah, the thing's this, right? Back then, pretty much everyone was to their own devices. Later on, when the super clubs came, that's when drug supply was getting controlled, because there was huge money involved in it. And people now were coming a little bit away from the, I love you buzz. Yeah. And they were becoming more, it's serious money here, let's monopolise this. But the reality of it is, people used to, go in and you did have friends and you knew their friends brought them in and you brought them in. What did happen though, and, it's people aren't aware of this, and I became very aware of it. During that time, the social drug dealer became acceptable, because you got to understand, when people sold Class A drugs, they were villains before that time. You know, even Puff was a villain that sold Puff. But then with ecstasy, because the atmosphere of everyone moving around together, you have people that like want a pill. So they'd say, oh, so-and-so's got good pills. So 10 of their friends would want a good pill. So say, can you buy all the pills? So he'd go and then he'd buy the 10 pills and he'd get 2, 3 for himself. So that's his drugs for the night. And then that moves from 10 to 20 to 30, 40, 50. And then suddenly Tom, who's got the pills, who gets the pills for his little group, who's got his day job, figures, actually, I don't need a day job anymore, and it can pay for the car payments, it can pay for the fucking... And then suddenly he becomes a drug dealer.
Yeah.
And you had thousands of drug dealers all kind of just spitting up. Geezers that were working as postmen and, you know, labourers were becoming drug dealers. So we created a whole band of what I called a social dealer during that time. And that then moved on to people selling Raps of Charlie, pub grub in pubs. And you had this whole thing where drugs became completely acceptable. Do you know what I mean? You know?
It's interesting because a lot of people think that the promoters, just like the scene was in such infancy, so was that side of it. And sometimes people have the illusion that, like, you promoters are in there putting 10,000 E's there.
Look, don't get me wrong. You know, you certainly couldn't put it past me in my later stages, 100%. And I'd admit to doing many things, do you know what I mean, that did manipulate the drug scene as we knew it, you know, for my benefit, right? But the reality is, back then, we were just green to that, do you know what I mean? It was happening, but the scene was the parties, you know? You'd made money from the parties. There wasn't the space to really do it. When I stepped away from the parties, I'll admit openly, yeah, that's exactly what I'd done. I saw the doors were open for the clubs. You know, we knew most of the people who were there, not just the security, people who were working in the clubs. Do you know what I mean? So you had access in through those doors, and you knew they were a license to print money because those were all legal, those clubs. Do you know what I mean? So, yes, that did happen, you know, but back then at those parties, it was too chaotic and unorganised.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Back to you then, Pasha, Genesis, and Sunrise. You was on that.
Yeah, so those were the parties. So we'd done the sequence of parties, as I said. Andy and Danny, they found us most of the warehouses. I think we found 3 on the spin. Done those events, and then it kind of, I think the last one that happened was a big one we'd done in Edmonton, and Tony at that time, I think he was getting squeezed a little bit, right? And he kind of didn't like the idea of the East London vibe. He started getting a little bit panicky. He took Dave, who's one of our friends, Dave Roberts. He's from, you know, of Northside. He was kind of, you know, became close with Tony, and they decided to move across and do the Back to the Future events, which was at Linford Film Studio. I think they were the first one. And then they slowly but surely moved away from the East End, which is probably a wise thing to do. And they, you know, started to put on some bloody huge events, you know. And where he was landing it now was they were landing aircraft hangars, and they were landing like, you know, big farmers' fields. So they were actually at the real yielding end of the business, you know. And with it, though, Tony was good at, you know, caught in controversy because I hid, right, from press. You know, I only became, you know, known after a huge case, as we know, in 2007. But before then, the last thing I wanted my name there was a book, a camera, a film. You know, forget it, right?
Tony was going on telly, wasn't he?
Tony was on telly. Tony was Jonathan Ross show and comfort himself with Jonathan Ross. He was on Sky News. He was on Kilroy. And if you flashed, Tony was on telly. Do you know what I mean? But he was doing it very cleverly, because what he was doing, he was selling his brand, which was Sunrise, you know. The only pity was that he wasn't more disciplined, because if he was more disciplined, you know, Sunrise would have been hands down, as we could have been, that Ministry of Sound brand. We could have had the record labels. We could have had the massive merchandising. We could have had a music channel. You know, it was endless opportunities because we really started it. Do you know what I mean? So we should have had it.
So Tony moves off.
Yep.
And starts putting on he wants to come out of the East End.
Back to the Future of Sunrise.
To Linford, but then he starts doing big things.
Huge events, yeah.
you lads staying east and north and
Yeah, so by
the
now,
underground.
the parties were getting hit every week. Before they started,
Yeah.
they were just
This
getting
is only
smashed.
after 3 months, though.
This is after 3 months. Genesis
Yeah.
was a very small period of time. People think it was years.
Yeah.
This is 3 months. Do you know what I mean? It ran from December the 10th, and I think the last party we'd done, I remember the last party, and I remember Lyndon saying to me, it's over now, was we done 2 at Ferry Lane, and the 2 at Ferry Lane, the second one was time to stop because the police were waiting there. But across the road, there was a huge hangar where Depeche Mode used to keep their equipment. Obviously, they weren't in there anymore. They'd left that empty, and we done that party. I remember the party because Jarvis done his first party on the same night. Biology. So Jarvis, again, another great character to the scene. Jarvis very much kind of had that kind of street culture in him. He went down to Rave at the Cave, said his whole thing that set off him to do biology, he said he saw a flyer at Rave at the Cave. It said Genesis. He's picked it up and he's come down to Genesis rave. And he said, and it was like a dance because it was. We had Mad Hatters do one of the sound system sets. We had all the traditional DJs, you know, we had, I don't know, Trevor Fung. We had Fat Tony. We had, you know, a whole contrast of DJs, but also we had Hatters sound system and we had a bunch of DJs that came with it, like the Kendricks, people like that. So where we had that earthy kind of rootsy kind of vibe about us as well. And people could actually relate to that more kind of the street. And like that was Jarvis. Jarvis was like, fuck that. I'm going to get on that. And then he went full hog with the biology parties, you know, and he just didn't care. He crashed through and really, really just went for it and didn't care what he said on the flyers, who he said he was going to have on there, who he wasn't going to have on there. He went for it. You know, Tarquin, another guy, you know, I didn't really know Tarquin that well back then, but I've got to know him now. And he had joined up with Jarvis to do World in Action. Again, he gave a very sophisticated, organised structure to it, you know, because sometimes you need that, you know, structure just to refine the brand. And Jarvis will tell you himself, you know, he needed that refining of that brand. Whereas the Jeremy Taylors and the Tintins already had that. You know, he was doing Great Crash of Bull. They were doing elaborate events, you know, prior to the warehouse days. So you had all that. With us, Genesis, as I said, it started to die because of the amount of raids that happened. We had May the 1st, we had a huge event. We had an event which was at Basildon Festival Hall, which was
a legal one.
It was the first legal event and the most problematic one. It's funny, I was talking to Fitzroy the other day about this, who's Hypnosis promoter, and you know, the security tried to rough him up as they did a few people in the bed. It turned out really badly for their security, and you know, there was 3 really, you know, serious injuries done on 3 of their doormen. And that was a sort of nail in the coffin because it meant we had to stay low to a certain degree. And Genesis after that just wasn't, you know, it didn't have the impact anymore. Everyone else was now moving forward. And to me, it was like I was losing heart with it. And then the final one we done actually was Mopham, but that was in August. And that was basically, we were supposed to have a venue. We didn't have a venue for that party. Okay, so we went ahead, we printed tickets, we printed flyers, and it was upgraded flyer. I went and this guy, Lyndon, who I know, Limpfield I knew, he done this picture as a stone carving. I think it was of Zeus, this particular one, with his 2 sons. It's an old story, basically, where he lied to the gods and the serpent came and killed him. Had a whole historic thing with it. But anyway, so it was a flashy flyer we done. We went out for it. We were supposed to get a venue. We didn't get a venue. And we stepped in with Jarvis at the last minute to do the event. Jarvis had a field. It was raining that night. And when I kind of saw where that was going, to me, it was like, I'm not about printing tickets and flyers for people and not having venues. Do you put them in? I'm not on that one. Do you know what I mean? I've been doing this since I was 16 years old. And I've always put a venue roof over where my punters are going. Do you know what I mean? So that was really me. And the relationship, I think, was flaking because it wasn't the same energy that was there at the point when it started.
Between you, Keith, and White.
Yeah, I think we all stayed friends, but it was a question of, it's just of recent that there's been a whole episode people have probably seen in social media, which we could talk about because it must be addressed. Right. But yeah, it started to break down. And that was where it was. And I just, I lost the flavour for it. If you do something, I always believe, do it to the best of your ability. We started a ticket agency, which some people that I knew had a car front in Bowchurch Road, not too far from Echoes. So we started selling tickets from there.
I think he's at the Enterprise now. Is that the car?
It's the car Enterprise. Yeah. So that was basically the next step. So we took one of the offices there. We had it as a ticket office because we knew all the promoters, So it made complete sense to, utilise those contacts and be able to become a ticket agency, which was a good idea. So we started with that. A couple of the characters who owned this particular site were very well known, let's put it like that. And people straight away started to tag us as well with certain elements. That was another thing that happened. And they'd come to us, they'd come to us like, oh, we've got such and such a problem. Can you sort it out or can you do it? And for some reason, everyone seemed to channel at me. So, if anything didn't go according to plan or as they'd expect it to turn out, it was probably, Andy, man, he's done this or he's done this. And I'll tell you one, and it's really strange, and I haven't been able to talk to him about it, but I hope he listens to the podcast because Anton was a very close friend, right. And Anton Le Pirate, right. Yeah, and he'd started Well Dance, and this was I shouldn't laugh, but in reality it was this. So he'd started Well Dance, and him and his partner came down just turned up one afternoon, and it was like, they've got some problems. I said, what's the problems? A guy that gives flyers they was giving out flyers outside a club one night, and what was a partner in Well Dance with them. He had an event on that night, which was called Beyond Therapy. So it was like, what happened? The guy got sprayed with gas, and Anton might have got slapped. It was like, mate. So I said, okay, we'll arrange a meet. We'll see what's happening and try to sort it out anyway. So we'd called up JP, Well Dance JP.
Right, so this is very relevant after.
Oh, this is
Well Dance.
You're getting history now,
right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And so there's Anton Well Dance.
I think another guy was called Dave.
Right, and also so you're saying JP was
three of my partners. The three of my partners.
Right, so you said that JP was involved.
JP funded the money.
They funded the money.
Got it.
So they're all Well Danced.
They're all Well Danced.
They're all Well Danced.
They're all Well Danced.
That's what you're saying.
They were all Well Danced.
Right.
And then what happened was JP had funded it, to the best of my knowledge, and they then decided they're going to do a party without him, at Well Dance too. And obviously that's not palatable. So how that transcended from that point, I don't know, but the people obviously who I was in business with the ticket agency, they called a series of meetings, and the way things just went, suddenly JP owned Well Dance and Anton Le Pirate, and this Dave guy left Well Dance. But it is not as hostile or as anything like people think. And I think Anton probably even blamed me for, taking Well Dance off of him and giving it to Jay. You'd like anyone can do something like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there were loads of incidents like that where I think Andy was, he'd done stuff. Do you know what I mean? He had gangsters behind him. He was doing things, which was a complete lie. But I think a lot of that tagging did go on, to be honest with you. And I don't think, obviously, of recent years where, things are common knowledge about my life, right? But putting the record straight back then, it was straight. It was, there was none of that going on, As I said, we were very much invested in the scene, and, there were so many good people around you.
See how calm you are now, and how you remember everything, your thoughts now, and we'll get on to all your inspiring things you do now. Mm-hmm. Was you fiery then? Was you fiery?
Yeah,
for you to have your car front, for you to have your ticket office where your car front was with the people who had it, for you to everyone coming to you going, Andy, we got this problem, blah blah blah. Was you fiery?
Look, you see, this is the thing, right? I'm from North East London. Yeah. The way we grew, right, was that, you don't stand down. You do what you got to do and you move on, right? Regardless. So when you say fiery, I could have a little side to me, right? Like most people, yeah. But I've always been fair all my life, okay? And I've never been a bully, and I've always been fair with people. So the reality of it is, it could be perceived that, yes, Andy had a temper. Yeah. You know what I mean? But that's where it was. I was not a football hooligan. I'd never be seen fighting and going to football matches or anything like that. But don't get me wrong, I stood my ground if I had a problem.
Because I don't get a bully from you whatsoever.
No,
it's someone
that's
that
not me.
take no shit.
That's not me.
Even when you was 20, 21.
No, because that's life. You know what I mean? You're going to be walked over. Do you know what I mean? You're victim or prey, you know. I'm not saying you're a predator, but you don't want to be prey in this world, you know?
Because it always blows me away young, like someone like you, is in that era of time.
Yeah.
And with some, you know, because just thinking about this now, logically, that's why I asked earlier, in the earlier stages of you doing it, there weren't no real trouble floating around in that few months. And then all of a sudden you go into, was it Basildon or Billericay? And then there really is trouble, and you know it's
but the trouble, for example, that is a perfect example. It wasn't trouble internally. That was sweet. It was internal powers that be bringing it to us. Do you see what I mean? So, but internally, as I said, as a group, you know, and our extended group, there wasn't really any real drama. You know, as I said, there was no people getting kidnapped. There was nothing like this ever happening. You know, it just didn't happen.
Right. So people in your there was no kidnapping.
There was nothing like this. Nothing like this. There was an incident, I do know, where two of our friends as well, went by for Wayne one morning at his mum's, asked him to come along to a meeting. He went along to a meet. Some people, you know, were there, some of our security, other friends. And I think Wayne, I don't know what happened, but he put himself in a situation that he was frightened. He folded, he started crying and gave away 50% of Genesis.
He gave away what?
50% of Genesis. But that was put straight, and that never happened, and everything was done. But the reality of it is, you know, I think you can put yourself in stupid situations sometimes, you know, as I said. And some people will have a problem, have a habit of doing stupid things like that, you know, as I said. But in terms of us being bullied or us getting this or all that, no, that didn't happen.
Yeah. With, see, like you mentioned, biology, Sunrise, Genesis, how you was like, in that period, like they're the big names, and like, you know, they're the trendsetters for what was to come with like Well Dance, Helter Skelter, Dreamscape. So when I think of Genesis, when I think of Sunrise, biology, then Energy carried on for a few years later, didn't it? They were going into Brixton Academy.
Yeah.
Why do you think, like, by the end of '89, and then that the rally in January, the Freedom to Dance thing, why do you think for you, and obviously you can't speak for the others, but why do you think all of those things kind of come to an end? And like by 1990, the early part, summer, there wasn't Sunrises and Genesis, and people were I remember Genesis trying to do something a few years later at I think it was Tasco Warehouse over. Why do you think it all just comes to an end for you all?
Because it was just because organisation. There was no real organisation, and you know, a lot of people they took excessive amount of drugs. They lived excessive lifestyles, which, you know, couldn't be maintained, you know, or, you know, kept afloat. And if you're not managing something properly and you're not running something as a professional business, it's inevitably going to collapse. And that's what it was. It was lack of organisation. And I keep getting back to this. Why didn't Ministry of Sound collapse? Because they were organised. They're an organisation that obviously, you know, carefully pathed and charted their way. But unfortunately, all the promoters that really had, you know, that opportunity to peak, they either decided they were going to walk. I decided I was going to walk away from it. Do you know what I mean? You know, because what was coming and the mess and the chaos, I had to look for somewhere that was going to get me more money, even if it meant more risk. Do you know what I mean? But other people moved into other things as well. There were people that moved into legitimate entities, away from warehouse parties. They used their contacts they had. You know, they funneled their way into other sources of business, and some just generally collapsed. You know, they expired their sell date and they tried to drag it up, flogging a dead horse kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, that's why I always admire Joe Labyrinth.
Joe done amazing and resilient.
That's why I always admire him, because he's from exactly that same moment in time that Genesis,
Yeah, he was there from the beginning.
Everyone started, even though by his own stories, it was flipping hard in their first
he had
months.
It hard, man. Yeah,
but while you guys had some huge ones while he was still finding his feet, then he really did have to fight off like extortion and other things, but somehow he really did outlast that original wave of people.
Joe, I think, with Joe, his resilience is unbelievable. I think Joe had a really, really tricky time, particularly when he was around the East End. The best thing that happened to Joe was the 4 races.
Yeah.
Because when he landed there, and I knew Newton well and stuff, and I remember going down there because Newton was very divisive as well, he was very mischievous. And he called me down to the club one day. He used to have this little office, which was at the side. You walked up to it, at the back anyway. I've gone up there and Joe was doing an event. So when Joe come up and Phil, who 2018. It was purely to test it, just to throw me in the works that I'd done Genesis and I might be coming in there to do nights and stuff like that. Because Newton, God rest his soul, was like that a little bit,
He'd been around the block, hadn't he?
He'd been round the block. And someone told me one day he had more strings than a banjo. Right, yeah. Right. But he was brilliant. I mean, he knew every angle there was. And like Joe, but when he arrived at the 4 Aces, he knew it was home. Do you know what I mean? And that's what the Aces had about it. If you were there, once you surrounded yourself by the right people, you were safe, and he had a great period of time. And I remember, and he was very sensible as well, Joe. I remember I think it was 97, I was involved again in the industry because I moved on from warehouse parties. I went back into the music industry in about 96. Then I'd obviously, aligned with my uncle, licensed reggae Sunsplash. I want to
get onto that.
Done all that stuff.
Yeah, I want to get onto all that because that fascinates me.
And one of the events we were doing, I remember one of the guys, Barry, we were sourcing acts from him. He had LL Cool J basically, to come over, and I think it was New Year's Day. It would have been 96. I think it was 96 New Year's Day or 97 New Year's Day. And Joe was doing a big New Year's Eve party that night, and he was already on edge with the police. And Newton, was convincing himself that we could put LL Cool J in this huge. The 4 Aces is a massive building. An idea. It used to be a circus. You know what I mean? Yeah. And at the back, there's a giant place, it's completely deteriorated. Balls are falling down, massive holes in the floor. I mean, it'd be the most unsafe sight you could ever see. And we somehow managed to convince Barry that if we patched up the floor, we could get LL Cool J to perform their New Year's Day. And Joe was like, "You're going to have 2,000 people or 3,000 people descending from Labyrinth the New Year's Eve throughout the day. Then you got this lot coming, 2 completely different crowds.
Come on, yeah.
It's going to go, the whole of Dalston Lane is going to be closed down and there's never going to be another event here, ever. Do you know what I mean? And it was a pause moment as yeah, you're probably right. Do you know what I mean? But that was the clarity that Joe had. Joe was quite, sensible with certain things, and he grew Labyrinth steadily,
How I always see Joe was he just had a natural ebb for the rave and the acid scene.
Yeah, he loved it. Yeah, he was part of it.
And seeing people part of it, and no one was going to stop him. The police, anybody wanted to take over, and that in them early days, that nucleus of him and Phil, and they in that along Dalston Lane, which was a no-go zone. Yeah, they were untouchable.
Well,
that's what made it heaven on earth. Well,
that club, right, the 4 Aces, because it's my manor. Yeah, so understanding what that was. There used to be a front line that used to run from the 4 Aces to the pub.
Oh, call it the front.
That was in the 90s. That was when crack cocaine was on the scene, and it was club with a reputation. You had Kurt, who ran the Hideaway, which was the basement underneath it. And I mean, all sorts was going on there back then. And you had, on the other side, you had where Phoebe's was, the front line started on Amherst Road and went all the way along a 2 mile stretch through Sandringham Road, right down to Johnson's Barbers, back onto Dalston High Road. I mean, it was the epicenter of drugs, crime, the whole lot.
Yeah,
you know,
reviews, it was the front line.
But coming there and dropping yourself in there at a time where things were changing was a great move, because no one was going to fuck around over there, and that was the way to stomp. Do you know what I mean? It's madness, you know, on the manor. It's uncontrollable, you know. And as I said, he found a home. Yeah. And God, how long did Labyrinth stay there for?
Well, I was there from 1990 to 1995 every Friday and Saturday. Every Friday and Saturday. Then when I then started going up and down the UK and all over Europe and the world, I think they was in there for another 3 years.
Mad.
And then they moved to Tottenham, pleasure rooms in Tottenham. So you lose the passion for the acid house and the rave and the warehouse scene, because that period that you was in it, like I said earlier, is so short, but so much happened for all of you young men at that time. Other than Joe. Joe was a bit older than
10
you.
years older, I think Joe is than me. Yeah.
Older than you. So Reggae Sunsplash come latter 90s.
So yeah, so
hang on. I want to know what you did from leaving the rave scene to then the Reggae Sunsplashes.
Hey, so
there's a smile on your face.
It's quite well. It's quite well documented, the journey. Obviously, right. When I kind of left the rave scene, so to speak, I decided if I was taking a risk, I might as well take a proper risk, and then I delved myself deeply into the drug smuggling distribution scene, you know, and that's what I'd done. I'd done it very, very heavily, and I kind of, you know, not saying something I'm proud of in any way whatsoever to put out there now, but it's my journey, and everyone has a journey, you know. And that's where I went with that. But at the same time, I had a passion and love for music. So I used to put money into a lot of events, you know, American artists coming in, different promoters. I'd back their events, things like that. When I got a spark to do something again was basically when I was asked to be involved in an event in Swansea, which didn't happen, but it reignited my passion for being a promoter in Swansea. Well, Swansea Airport. The event didn't happen, but I kind of regrouped in what I'd done. And then I thought to myself, I've not done a festival yet. Let's have a crack at this, you know, done everything else. And it's a gradual, progressive ladder moving up. Financially, we're in a strong position. And I knew that to get something, you had to enter with a brand that could make an impact with a big footprint. Reggae Sunsplash had been here in 1994. It came over when David Rodigan and John Burroughs, he was chairman of Capital Radio, wanted to bring it over as part of the Capital Jazz Festival, is what they called it. They done huge events. And my uncle, he was connected to Sunsplash, had a, history of, being a real kind of a, mover and shaker in the reggae music industry over here. He was approached, along with some of the other partners in Jamaica, to bring Sunsplash over here in conjunction with Capital Radio. They'd done a huge event at Crystal Palace, Selhurst Park in 84. Then they'd done it again in 85. Then they went to Clapham Common the following year, which was a free event, but it was huge. It outgrew anything you could imagine. Some people, estimated 160,000 people in footfall passed through that day. Of course, that was a huge event, and it was dominantly Afro-Caribbean based. Wasn't something the police particularly enjoyed the idea of doing it. So every excuse was made in the book to, disengage it so it couldn't happen again. But it left a huge legacy because it was such an event of such capacity. It had Bob Marley appear in the Jamaica one in 76. It had Stevie Wonder. It had a great history. Most of these festivals that exist today wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Sunsplash. And I had access to the festival. We went out to Jamaica. My uncle was like, no, you know, I'm not interested in it. I've retired from the music industry. And it was like, I've got to get him in somehow because we've got to make this happen. Anyway, I spoke to David Rodigan for about 4 hours. I was like, David, we've got to bring it back. I want to bring it back. But juniors, da-da. And David was like, I'm really up for it because that was David Rodigan's kind of, you know, mecca, you know. And eventually my uncle he'd got involved in developments, basically. He was building huge housing developments out in Jamaica. So I thought the best way to get him back into the music industry would be by helping with that development, investing in it. And we ended up buying huge amounts of machinery, front-end loaders, backhoes, everything you could possibly imagine, and shipping them out and investing in the development project in turn to bring him in out of retirement from the music industry to come on board and help us do it. So nearly 2 years, we went through legal battles. We went through everything humanly possible. I mean, story with artists like you couldn't even believe, dealing with lots of Gregory Isaacs and Dennis Brown before he died. I mean, these guys were just it was crazy. And the politics that was involved in it, you couldn't even start to imagine. And eventually, you know, after 18 months of work building infrastructure, I wanted to do it and give back to the community because it wasn't at this stage just about doing an event. It was about building a legacy. So we done it at Victoria Park. I wanted it to be on the manor. And we started to create, you know, stuff like we're doing 5 or 6-a-side football tournaments with local estates. This is postcode gang issues. Do you know what I mean? And we were trying to bring together a community. We've done like 200 stalls for local people who wanted to sell stuff there. So it was really going to build. But, you know, it was frightening in size because I'd, you know, spent a huge amount of money. A reggae festival had never seen that before. We had what was the Oval stage, which was Glastonbury's main stage at the time. We brought in, you know, the best sound, the best light, and the best rigging, everything going. We kind of, you know, filled the space with it. And, you know, we were going for gold. But sadly, again, my greed and stupidity let me down yet again. You know, I decided I still wanted to do crime. Owning the biggest festival potentially, what would have been in Europe, I still decided to fuck around.
Right.
And came down on me, basically.
The festival went ahead, though.
Festival went ahead, a massive festival, Victoria Park, 40,000 people. We were on, sponsors from Haggard to come on board. Everything was a clean license to print money, basically. And I let myself down. I got wrapped up into it. NCA at the time, it was National Crime Agency. They were on me, you know what I mean, for various crimes of law and organised crime. And it came down, you know, in collapsing. I went on the run and the festival basically just fell to shit.
I think it's a line for anyone who, like in the modern, like I see it a lot, like even though I'm a dance music, rave DJ, like I always keep an eye on modern rap, like what they call drill, and and I look at some of the stories where youngsters are still they still want to keep the road life and that life while making music. And trust me, there is not a single artist, in your case promoter, in this world who has managed to do both successfully side by side. Yeah. It is impossible. If you could choose now, music or the crime, what would you have gone?
Well, look, the bottom line is like this, okay? The reality was that you could never put a young head on old head on young shoulders. And I wasn't even that young, but the reality of it was I was young mentally. I was young because I couldn't see the work and the effort had gone to get it. Then you get it, and then you just literally give it away. You lose it all and your liberty. But the reality of it is, could you change time? I can't change time. All the things I've done now, finally, by doing the charity that I do, working with young people, having that lived experience benefits them now. So I can't turn the clock back or change that. I can put it to experience. I can actually give that experience and that knowledge to a young person who is on that road, who can make it, because it's no longer about me. Do you know what I mean? It's about next generation. It's very important, you know? You have to pass the baton on, but say, look, don't make the mistakes I made for these reasons, you know? And that's, you know, that's lived experience in anything.
Yeah, I know some incredible artists over the years who were just amazing at what they did, vocalists or producers or DJs as well, who just chose, they kept getting drawn back.
Yeah, it happens. Yeah.
You know, and it happens, and not everyone's going to be like you, who's got like a brain that goes, well, okay, that's then.
Yeah.
It gives you an incredible story, an incredible life that the internet and publishers and films and documentaries are drawn into continually.
Oh,
but not many get to live to tell the tale and then do something inspiring for others. So what's your charity all about?
So I formed the AP Foundation 6 years ago. I was doing quite a long, lengthy prison sentence. At that time, I saw a lot of young people who were coming in postcode gang affiliated. The issues they had in prison were terrible because as they arrived, there was conflicts. And I just looked at it and thought, I'm responsible for a lot of this madness. If I hadn't filled the place with drugs for the best part of 30 years, you know, there'd be a lot more young people not in their coffins, do you know what I mean? And not in prison probably, you know, but I wanted to live that lifestyle. And, you know, myself and another very well-known prisoner decided we were going to see if we could put together a program. The governor of prison agreed. We brought in some very well-known guys who were in the system, gang affiliated, and we started to mediate the problems, conflicts. And then that was a successful program. When I finally got released from prison, I set up a charity to do exactly the same thing in the community and in prisons. So, you know, what we do is we work with prisoners, we work with young people, we try to take them away from gang lifestyles and teach them skills, you know, entrepreneurship skills, setting up businesses, you know, how to maybe make good of those street skills that they've got and actually turn them into monetized businesses that aren't going to put them back in prison, you know, so learn from my mistakes. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I've made my mistakes now, so don't you have to go put yourself through those, you know, and that's the best advice you can give anyone, you know, that's the greatest reward you can have. It's no good holding on to a dream for 36 years of a flash in the pan or 20 years. Do something else. Do you know what I mean? If you've got the ability to do it, get on with it, make it successful, and, you know, just keep striving. And that's been the key with me. And music is always part of my passion. And I dare say I will undoubtedly, if I don't, my sons will, you know, do something huge and make an impact in the industry, you know. And there are things, I don't look at things I've done as gone and finished and done. They're always there because there's banks of experience that have left behind, do you know what I mean, to pass it on with. So, like, that's what I like. I look at some of these things and think, Jesus, you know, wouldn't it be great to revive that? Wouldn't it be great to do that? But if you do something, don't do it half measured. You've got to do it properly. You've got to make it to such a high bar, such a high standard, it exceeds what you achieved. And I set some high bars in my life.
Set some high bars.
You know what I mean? So to go and try to now go over the top of those, they've got to be really big things.
Do you know what's really interesting to me, right? I get DJs sitting here or promoters who have done it a long time and they can't remember certain moments in time or names of tracks or what really happened or years. You are passionate about music. You remember clubs and when they started, dates of things of when they happened. Earlier when I said to you, name me some tunes you used to play, you went bam, 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 bam. I can ask my DJ mates, tell me some tunes you played in '88. So you've got music running through you. But it fascinates me that you can also like you say,
listen.
you also drawn to the crime side when you had that huge festival going on.
Listen, you got to be real about your life. It's no good fabricating. People just see straight through that, right? So one thing with me, whatever I say I've done, I've done. I don't say things I haven't done. That's my life, yeah? And that's why I can remember everything I've done because I've done it. See what I mean? There won't be a question. You can ask me any question. I'll take any question from any presenter. They can ask me. My life's an open book. Do you know what I mean? And you'll get an answer and it'll be accurate. All right, I might get a precise time or a minute, but you know, it's going to be accurate. Do you know what I mean? Because it's real. And that's the thing about it. But it's passionate. Every single thing I've done, whether it's good or bad, I've done it for a reason.
At the age you're at now and the way you look at life and, you know, your charity gives back, and what do you think led you down the crime routes? What now looking back at it,
Do you know this, right? And this
God.
and this is really, this could sound really, really cold, right? But I have to be honest. I looked at it, and in the midst of all the things and all the people frightened of this or scared of that or hear about that, I looked at it and thought to myself, if I do that, can I be the best at it? If I do that, can I stand for it and can I do it? Right? And as cold as it sounds, I said, yeah, I can. And I've done it.
Yeah.
And that's all you do. And I know that sounds terrible because I'm supposed to be sitting there and say, oh, I come from a bad family and my parents beat me and I had no money. I'm not saying none of that. I had no reason to do it. I chose to do it. Do you know what I mean? It was a benefit I wanted and I went and took it. But I now look at the reflection because I did actually grow a conscience and looked at all the damage and devastation I've caused probably thousands of families, thousands of people, you know, not one or two. Do you know what I mean? It was always excessive, you know, because not knowing when to stop or to have limits was always a thing that I've always endorsed that. My saying was Tesco, stack it high and sell it cheap. Do you know what I mean? It was always bold and bolshy, you know, but with no thought of, you know, what you putting other people through doing it.
Yeah. Well, obviously my fascination is the music.
Yeah.
First and foremost. But as fascinating as your music time is, what you did in the drug trade is also fascinating to the point where you have had books, you have had people write about you, and you've currently got a 3-part documentary on Sky.
Yeah, so that's another reflection that a lot of people don't understand. And there are a few things like, it was funny because my life's always been documented some weird reason. In 2007, Donald McIntyre literally documented my life in real time in Cocaine and Coconuts, documentary when I was in prison, you know, and then I ended up obviously with things like this. Sky Amsterdam now has done this 3-part series, but then also Inquirer Point 2 are doing a 4-part series. And there are bits and pieces that come out of my, you know, on my life at different times through these different sources and media sort of channels, and happily talk on podcasts, you know, because I've had an interesting life. But there are things I'm not particularly proud of, but at the same day, I have to own it. I'm not going to turn around and say I didn't do it. I've done it and I own it. Do you know what I mean? And then it's just a question of now being able to say, well, if I've done it, did I do a good job of it? You know, were my parties good parties? Yeah. Were what I'd done, you know, I've done stuff and I've done it to the best of my ability, and it's always turned out to give some people, a lot of people, either great financial benefit or great times.
Where can people watch the new Sky?
That's on Sky at the moment. That Sky series is run on Sky Documentaries.
And it's on replay as well?
That's on replay, all the Sky stuff. Cocaine and Coconuts.
And what's the Sky one about? Just give us a...
So the Sky one basically is history of smuggling in Amsterdam, and it basically takes you through one of the main people who was involved in the early hashish smuggling, which opened up the market for the coffee shops. Then the second series takes you into ecstasy, basically, which obviously was the heartbeat of the whole rave scene and how that was manufactured and how that was obviously being brought out. And then the third series is amazing twist of how the actual systems and the powers were tricked into ending up to actually, you know, the authorities ended up becoming massive drug smugglers because criminals had managed to manipulate them in such a way they'd had them wrapped around a little finger. So that's, you know, quite an interesting watch with a mad twist. And then Cocaine and Coconuts, I suppose, is me doing exactly that to the authorities in a very big case in 2006.
Yeah. When you look back now, like going back to 1989, and you know, people like Mickey Finn, Kenny Ken, who you know, and like
all of them, yeah.
And like you think you dipped out by January 1990. What do you think when you see all those people still going strong?
They're all my great friends, you know. They were like Mickey, and you know, you got Frost and Hype, all back to charity. So they're all involved in a knife crime campaign we do now, which is called Who's Next? Who's next to be stabbed, to be killed, and just get a life sentence, just get a life-changing opportunity, you know, a signal we're trying to send out to young people. So, you know, I stay in touch with everyone. As I said, all my brothers, you know, it's one message. We're all grown now, and it's about, you know, it's giving a message, positive message. I respect so much what they're doing musically, as I said, and I've got nothing but love for all of them. Even Cole Cox. Cole's done an amazing career, considering where he's come from, you know. But as I said, like Mickey, and like, I'm full of pride. Every time I see Hype, I laugh, and we joke because I had a saying I gave to him. It's called 1 deck and a piece of sponge, and he keeps coining it now.
Yeah,
you know?
he used it on the podcast.
You'll start hearing you say it because that's where we start. I said it was 1 deck and a piece of sponge, Kevin. I remember we didn't even have decks. They didn't even exist. Do you know what I mean? And so it's good seeing the development and seeing these guys now have got all this younger generation, you know, watching them really carefully. How do they mix? How do they produce? You know, so yeah, it's good, you know, and to be part of that whole thing and watching that develop in itself is a great experience and great memories, you know.
What does the future hold for you?
I think future holds for me just really moving forward now with positive things. One thing, obviously, is my memoir. I spent time in prison writing my memoir, which is now with my agent, Meg Davis. So she's going to be giving that out to various publishers this month. That goes on submission. It's called Empire of Dirt, because all this life has been an empire of dirt when I realistically look at it. And, you know, it's important that message is there, because I had a book in 2007 released, Urban Smuggler, and it's been a point of confusion and controversy, actually. And if ever there was a curse, it probably was the biggest curse I had, because what happened was, on my trial in 2013, the prosecution were just taking parts of it and reading it to the jury to notify this person I was. But then of recent, I might as well put it out there because it is kind of a current issue, you know, and I must address it. Is of recent, you're probably aware that myself and Wayne's been randomly doing these posts on social media over the book, you know, and what has to be made crystal clear was that particular book in 2007, after the big case had come out, I was offered a publishing deal, which I hadn't written any book to that time. It was a reasonably good advance. It didn't mean anything to me to do it. I got Norman Parker to write it, and Norman had lifted some of Wayne's book, Class of '88. Now, he'd correctly accredited it as well in the back of the book, and acknowledgement, it clearly says thanks to Wayne, and Class of '88 was a source for the thing, but I had no idea he'd done it, right? And what then happened was, and it was only obviously when I was in prison in 2015 that I then saw the book after it had been read in the court. And obviously I started to read it, and then there were just so many fabrications in the book about security being an SAS man and all these kind of mad stories. So I bought the book back to rights from Random House and took it out of publication. But for some reason of recent, Wayne has been, you know, going on people's posts and saying I ripped his book and I ripped his stories. I wasn't part of Genesis and all kinds of just crazy stuff.
You hadn't even read his or your book?
I'd never read his or my book. It wasn't even something
I'm going to say something to people.
Do you know what I mean?
People come up. I've read my book now.
Yeah.
Right? But my book's been out there for about 10 years.
Yeah.
And people come up to me, because it's Sonia who's read my book, and I did it like you did. I give loads of interviews to Andrew Woods, who wrote the book he wrote the book. He just had to listen to my drunken ramblings. It was when I was drinking. I haven't drunk for 8 years, right? So so people come up at gigs and get me to sign their book, and they say, "Oh, brilliant book," and I say, "Oh, is it? I ain't fucking read it." and there was a point where I meant that, and I could believe that you've not read it because you've given the interview.
You just don't, But the reality of it is this: it's like plain and simple. When they offered me the book, and it was, as books goes, it was a successful book. It went to trade paperback.
Yeah.
It was reprinted with 2 different covers. It stayed in print for 10 solid years without coming out of print. You know, I got a substantial advance on it as these books go. So I get it. Probably people will be a bit jealous of that, but it's just another project. I didn't even, do you know what I mean? To not read the book, but this particular manuscript now I've written is a labour of love. I've taken my time, it's written in my hand, and it, you know, is the truth.
Which
every word.
I've I've started
And
reading through
every word in there, every word in there, I will come on a podcast with you or any podcaster and chat, ask me any question, challenge anything, because there can only be the truth.
When will the book be out?
Well, the publishers now obviously will be send it to various publishers through my agent. Talking to one or two at the moment, depending on how things go, probably middle part of next year, I should imagine.
And where can people look up your charities? What are the web addresses?
So AP Foundation, which is apfoundation.org.uk. You can, attend a site like that. You can also attend our knife crime site as well, which is who's next, the number 2.com. And that's the campaign we're running at the moment. And generally speaking, if you put me into Google, I'm quite relatively known.
All right, and what about Insta and Facebook?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what, don't off the top of my head, but if I give them to you, you can put me in the descriptions box, that'd be good.
Oh, good. Mate,
Thank you.
We started off saying you're the real deal.
Listen,
we're ending saying you're the real deal.
It's our journey.
All your old mates said, say hello to him.
Listen, nothing but love for all of them.
Brilliant. Thank you, mate.
Take care.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Daniel.